All right, Jeff, let's do some tennis talk. It's French Open time. Our man over there at Roland Garros, hiding out in a French kitchen at the moment, but joining us after a good day of tennis out there. Christopher Clarey, friend of the show, writer, author. Welcome back.
Hey, great to see your faces, even though I'm in the kitchen, but it's good. It's not too hot in here yet.
That's
I think
okay.
I think you I think you're just rubbing it in. It's not bad enough. Like we're in Jersey and he's in Paris.
Hold on,
Yeah,
I'm gonna rub it in even more. Here we go. See,
Oh,
look at
here it
this.
comes.
he's got like
Got
a
A
my
baguette there.
fresh baguette.
Yeah.
getting my
See,
Oh,
now
baguette.
that's rubbing it in. See,
French baguette. Although the baguettes in America are getting better, I have to say. But yeah, I got that.
well,
all right. Well, then don't eat that one.
Should
Bring
I
it
do the whole
home.
interview like this? I have it underneath my arm like that?
yeah, just
Bring
just
that one
right
home.
there.
I'll take it.
Yeah, Jeff will take it. Just bring it back, declare it
Uh-huh.
at customs, and you'll be all good when you come back.
Sounds good. All right.
So you've got this new book out, The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay. We had talked about this. You were working on it the last time you joined us. And we'll get to what's in the book, but I kind of wanted to work backwards because you're there in France and we saw this celebration the other night of Rafael Nadal's career, and it kind of seemed like the end of an era there that was basically encompassed in your book. Talk about what we saw on the clay the other day.
Yeah, it was very full circle. Even though Rafa, officially retired last year in November after a Davis Cup defeat in Malaga, Spain, in his home country. This one had the feel of finish line to me, even though it was 6 months later. They just did it right, and they really captured him. The emotion was there. It was beautiful light and the clay. It was just perfect. I thought it's rare that you get those moments that really match the achievement and match the character of the guy. But I think the time they had to do it really showed. And I think you had moments where Rafa was out on the clay by himself, which is a nice symbol. You think about it. I mean, really, he sort of stands alone on the clay with 14 ridiculous French Open titles. It's a crazy number. And he got very emotional. And he got really emotional with, his family, with his friends, with his rivals, obviously, who came. Federer, Djokovic, and Murray came just as they came for Federer's celebration a couple of years ago in London. But the thing that really got me was to watch him was how much he broke down when he saw all the behind the scenes people who had been there, that they trotted out for him to sort of thank him for basically thanking him for his good manners and thanking him for his kindness to them. People that booked the courts, that reserve the cars, that string the rackets, that organize everything. And I don't think I'd seen a big athlete do that in a ceremony like that. And they surprised him with it. And I thought it was very touching to see how emotional he was about that. I know it mattered to him a lot over the years. And then the lovely touch at the end. Were they going to name another stadium for him? Potentially, they've already done that in Barcelona. There's the Pista Rafa Nadal in Barcelona. It's his home country. Didn't seem quite right to rename the main court, which is named for a Frenchman named Philippe Chatrier. The second court's already got Suzanne Lenglen's name on it, great women's champion from France's past. There really wasn't a way to do the names. I was wondering, how would they do it? What were they going to do? They already have a statue of Rafa near the entrance, larger than life. And they came up with this wonderful idea with a plaque embedded in the clay at the edge of the net that has his footprint in it, an impression of his footprint on the clay, the red of the sole of his sneaker, and then the number 14. It was just great. And he was blown away by it, you could tell. And I think it was really a lovely thing. I mean, he's become part of the place. He's become embedded in this tournament by his achievements. And in a way, it's great. He'll always be on the surface of that court and when people play in the future.
And the other thing that they did was they handed out T-shirts that that said "Merci, Rafa," which I thought encapsulates what you just talked about. Is that he was more than just a great athlete who performed at the highest level in a sports arena. He was something more to the people that were there, especially the people behind the scenes. What did it mean to those people? You started to describe it, but what did it mean to those people? Not what it meant to Rafa, but what did it mean to all those behind the scenes people to have Rafa there for that moment and throughout his career?
I mean, I don't think those people are mistreated by other champions by any
Mhm.
means. There's plenty of, politeness and connection. But Rafa, I mean, just because of the way he was raised in Mallorca, which is a tightly knit community, multi-generational household, living with his grandparents, his uncles, walking around the village where he was from and connecting with people. I think that's just the way they were taught to greet people from all different ranges of society with respect in his family and his community. And I think that's what he brought to the circuit. So yes, other champions I'm sure have been very nice to the court bookers and the stringers, but Rafa really went out of his way to make them feel seen. I think that's right. And I think that came through. It really mattered to him that those people wanted to see him, that treated him, they were happy to see his face every year. And he said that in his press conference afterward. He said he felt like he wanted to be the guy that when he comes back after his retirement, when people see him, that they're happy to see him. Yeah, it's a not a terribly original thought for the average person, but for a superstar champion in sports, it's not something I'd ever really heard mentioned as a point of emphasis before. So they brought them out, and I think they were very emotional. His longtime driver and people like that nobody outside of the tennis community would know, and they put them out in the daylight, and they lined up in front of him, and then he just lost it. As you saw, he just lost it. He started to sob, and that was really the most emotional moment in many ways of the ceremony. And then he embraced each one of them, and then later on, I know he went back after the thing was over and sought a lot of them out, kind of one by one, and told them in person again, great to see you, thank you. So it was a great sort of reflection of character. Rafa has his faults, like all of us do, but I think he handled himself and conducted himself very, very well with the tennis community and people, through all levels of it. I called it in the book the taxi driver test. Somebody you meet, you don't have has no real leverage or influence over you. How do you treat them? And I think he passes that test.
All right. Well, I'm about to do something that's going to make you very uncomfortable. Writers, authors don't like to make things about themselves. Here's the lighthearted one. Now, how much do you think you can get for that baguette? And do you think you can get more for that T-shirt?
The baguette, I just bought it. It's pretty fresh, Baguette's about €350. So, I'm thinking that's, the $4 range. And I think I can get a lot more for the T-shirt, but I'm probably not going to sell it. I think I'm going to keep it.
You're alone in not selling it.
Those T-shirts are now listed for up to €500.
That's a lot of baguettes. That's a lot of baguettes.
That is a lot of baguettes.
That should be that's the new currency. It's 110 baguettes.
Merci baguette.
The Roland Garros currency. So
exactly.
More importantly, we don't usually you usually as an author don't like to be the story, but you have been covering tennis for a lifetime, and your last close to a decade has been following and writing the stories of the lives of two of the greatest tennis players of all time, in Federer and now Rafa. And you're there for this moment where they're on the court together for this celebration of rivals, basically. What was it like for you as a guy who has spent so much time learning so much and covering these guys for so long?
I mean, I won't lie. I'm not their friend. I am a journalist who chronicled them, and they know me, and we spend a lot of time together. But it's not a situation like they're not my friends, and nor would I want them to be, nor would they want to be. But the connection's real, and I think in this case, because I have lived in the last 2 years in particular with Rafa in my head almost every day when I wrote this book. It took about 2 years to do. Our conversation about it seems quite a while ago, but I think that just made it all the more powerful to see all these threads converging on the clay. These things that I had spent 2 years thinking about, the connection to the surface, his rivalries, how they evolved over time or devolved and re-evolved, the connection to all the different elements. And the book I wrote this time really, as you guys said, is designed to see the impact of Rafa on Roland Garros and the impact of Roland Garros on Rafa. It's not all, obviously we can't reduce him to just a clay court specialist. He's more than that, but this is the essential connection of his career with a place and a surface and a substance, if you will. So I really, to see that, particularly the moments when he was just out there on the clay, kind of leaning on the podium for support and just watching the videos, feeling the emotion. It just felt like he was in a painter with his blank canvas. He wasn't painting today, but he's painted so much on it. So I just had a lot of strong emotions just seeing these storylines converge, and it did feel very much like the end of his career, even though he hasn't played in 6 months. And it felt to me, in a much more minor key, the end of a creative process for me, where I
Yeah,
had
as a
spent all this time with him in my head. And this is the point where it converged. And I said, damn, this is an epilogue and I haven't had a chance to write it yet.
as a fan watching it, it felt like the end of an era.
Yeah.
It felt like basically my early adulthood, growing up, the last 20 years of my life has been watching these four men fight it out for championships. And here they are all going off into the sunset around similar times, basically. And you see a bunch of new faces in the sport. I'm curious, how did writing about Nadal differ from your previous writing of Federer? The access, the tone, the emotional texture. What was different? What was the same?
Great question, but I'd love to ask you a question first, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What when you said that, what about Djokovic? Because Djokovic is still playing and he's a huge part of. Do you think that you won't feel that end of the era when he's gone, or because now there's no more rivalry?
So
That
that's the word
how
I was
how
going to use.
how would you define why you felt that way?
That's what I was going to use is the word rivalry. I think it's what happens next. Can he establish those rivalries with Alcaraz and whoever some of the next players are that are coming up? For my young adulthood, I would turn on a tennis match or a tennis tournament, and generally one of those four guys would be in the finals along with Joker. And so, it just seems like you're seeing kind of a new guard that has to emerge because some of the names that dominated for so long, separate from Joker, have moved on.
Yeah. And I think it was interesting to see the four of them. Murray's a distant fourth, but he's also a solid fourth, I think. Even though Wawrinka won 3 majors like Murray's body of work everywhere else is so much bigger. So it was appropriate to see him. But all those guys, the three of them, was weird to see. 3 retirees and then Djokovic, who's 38. So I can see what you're saying, because even though the era doesn't really end until Djokovic finishes, he no longer gets to play those guys. And that's the heart of this, the heart of sports, the heart of the matter was the rivalries, as you said. And
I think you're setting us up. I think the next book is going to be a Djokovic book.
yeah, I keep hearing that. I keep hearing that. I don't know.
Missing from the collection.
Well, no, but here, to answer the question that you asked, Jason, it is, I think people will look at it differently when Djokovic retires. Of the four of them, he's the villain. He's the guy that was probably the most controversial that at least I don't see when I watch tennis, that he's the fan favorite. Depending on where you go around the world, Andy Murray and Federer and Rafa all are fan favorites in most of the places that they play. Djokovic has played the villain, not to all of his career, but certainly towards the latter half of his career.
I think that's helped make the stories, though. I think,
but I don't think
he'll.
I don't think he'll have the same. I don't think people will have the same fond farewell that they did, like they just had for Rafa.
Yeah, Jeff, you're making me think too, in a sense that this is kind of Novak's opportunity now, because everybody else is gone, and so he's sort of holding off the younger generation. But because of the way celebrity works and brands work, Roger and Rafa are still very visible out there.
I'm curious
in the landscape.
Do you think that does he have an opportunity to be looked upon differently as now the kind of older player on the tour in the twilight of his career? He may not want to look at himself like that, but to Jeff's point, he has been the villain at times. Does he have the chance now to redefine that with playing in a different era?
I think there's a little bit of redefinition just lately, because I feel like, the matches with Alcaraz, last year's Olympics, the gold medal match, and also I got to say, Novak has his controversial side, no doubt. He is the disruptor, if you will, and there's no question about that. But the guy has a lot of ability to lose with dignity and to be a good winner too. He's both, and he's able to really project that. I don't think the general public maybe has picked up on that as much, but he's had a lot of moments in the last couple of years where he's been kind of in a gallant position, and he's had to, after playing Alcaraz or this younger generation, these guys are almost 15 to 20 years younger, had some amazing matches with him. So Wimbledon final a couple of years ago, French Open craziness in the semis a couple of years ago, the Olympic final. So he's already playing the next generation. Well, these other guys are really not. But I just don't sense the needle moving that much. And maybe it's because it's just because it's so hardwired with these rivalries. But he does have an opportunity. I mean, look at Martina Navratilova was really viewed as kind of a tennis ogre for a lot of her career. She was just beating up on people, even though she had the great rivalry with Chrissy Evert. And by the end, there was a lot of nostalgia and emotion toward her as she endured and became kind of the aging tennis star. And people saw the vulnerability. Even a guy like Connors, was not easy to embrace. But by the end, it was, feisty Jimmy still fighting on. There was that sort of connection that gets established. Novak, that could happen too. But Novak is just an amazing tennis player. So maybe an appreciation for that, when he's more on his own, if he stays another season or two, which I have my doubts about, whether he'll be more appreciated just because, wow, take on those greats and come out ahead in the numbers game is something, and we should appreciate that.
So talk to us about what comes next for tennis with Rafa moving on. You write about this vivid picture of an intense competitor and a deeply private person. What surprised you the most when you were doing the interview with him that you didn't know?
Well, just to be clear, this book is independent, just like the Federer book was. I mean, I did not do this book with Rafa. I based it on all my years of covering him, and we didn't cooperate with the book, nor did I ask him to or expect him to. He has his own projects, I'm sure, but this is my take on all of our reporting and with the New York Times over the years, and I got plenty of access. So, and I did a lot more reporting for the book. But my surprises were I had a couple. I'd say there's the Rafa side, and there's also the Roland Garros French Open side, because this book is very different from the Federer book because it's about Rafa and the place and the clay, and I really go deep on Roland Garros to try to give you a sense of what this place is about that he dominated. So there were surprises in both categories. For Rafa, I think I realized how different he was when he was young, when he was playing. That was really surprising to me. We think of Rafa as routines, rituals, ticks, taking forever. Get on, please, please serve today, and just very kind of a rhythmic, almost ponderous approach. But when he was young, he was quite the contrary. He was playing at light speed. He was grabbing the balls as 12, 13 years old, playing the points in a flurry, and I'd never knew that nor had really realized that. And so I was surprised. And I guess what happened was Tony Nadal, his uncle and longtime coach and mentor, and other people in that era felt that Rafa was going to burn himself out. Motor was revving at such a high speed that they, asked him to slow down. They gave him extra balls to look at between points, develop some routines, and it kind of became a monster, really, for him. But the whole impression of Rafa with that natural state is very different. So that was surprising. So how you manage that, and you realize that in a way, not unlike Federer, who had a volcanic temperament but managed to contain it, or Bjorn Borg as well, Rafa also was playing a little bit against type with his routines and rhythm in order to control the proceedings and be able to manage his energies and produce over a long match and a long season. Other thing that surprised me was I'd always had sort of equated Rafa with Uncle Tony, like many people do, and his influence on Rafa was profound, no doubt. Rafa would not be a tennis player if it were not for his uncle. He would be a soccer player. With his other uncle, Miguel Angel was a Spanish soccer star, and Rafa loved soccer and was great at it. But Tony was the element that turned him toward tennis and made his talent clear. But other people in that orbit early on also played really important roles, and other people played really important roles in Rafa's early career. So Tony gets a lot of the credit, deservedly, but there was a bit of a village behind Rafa that played a bigger role, which I didn't realize. And I think also, I think I was surprised by some of the things I found out about the Federer Nadal rivalry. There was more tension behind the scenes than I realized. More issues between the teams and sort of adjusting to Rafa's emergence and kind of getting in Federer's space when Federer had really emerged at the top. And that wasn't as easy to handle as it might have seemed from the outside. So there was more texture, and it's very human. I think where they ended up by the end was real, and the rivalry was a friendly one. But there was more stuff going on behind the scenes than I knew, for sure. And the last thing I'd say is just that he also had in 15 and 16, kind of between the eras of his greatest play, he had some serious anxiety issues on the court. He had a really hard time, keeping it together. And I think he had to, he got some psychological help and had to really kind of come through a really tough period in his career to reemerge later on. But I cut you off.
Is that something? Well, no, this is because that's an important piece. It's something that we talk about with athletes all the time. Is how to manage the psychological aspect of the sport. and the intensity of the sport and the anxiety that comes along with the sport. And tennis players, at least more recently, have been open about that. I know between Jason and I don't think we've heard that about Rafa. How did he deal with that?
Well, I think, if you watch some of the stuff, I was in some of the press conferences in 2015 and 16. So you got to put it in for people who don't know the arc of the career. Rafa emerged as a prodigy. He dominated the French Open, had some really major injury problems he had to overcome very young. And then for the first few years, once he resolved those with the foot issue, he dominated the French Open and was a very solid number two. And then ended up sort of taking control of the game when he won that great Wimbledon final in 2008 against Roger in the twilight, and finally broke Roger's winning streak on the grass. And then was a pretty established presence. Djokovic came into their lives and dominated them at different times, but Rafa was okay. And then around 15, 16, he really started to have trouble performing at the same level. And it looked to me, with my knowledge of tennis at that time, that was the end of Rafa's period of greatness. So I think it was caused by some things he already had in him, that sort of natural anxiety and nervousness and edginess that he felt that they needed to maintain and contain as a young person. I don't know all the details, but I think he was able to break out of it with some help from the outside. And he also changed coaches. He and Tony brought in Carlos Moya, who had been another number one, amazingly, from Mallorca, this pretty small Spanish island, number one in the world before Rafa, and was a real role model for him. Brought him into the team, made a change in his inner circle, which is a very tight one. And I think he also was able to get a lot of strength and support from playing at the Olympics in Rio in 2016, when he came back from an injury and played doubles with his buddy Mark Lopez. They won the gold. I don't think I've ever seen Rafa as happy as he was in that tournament. And he just sort of was able to carry the flag and get all the vibes. He's got a bit of a team athlete in him too. So I think all those factors came together. And when he came back in 17, after another injury break, that's when he really had the renaissance. So did Federer, and they both rose again. Djokovic and Murray kind of fell away for a bunch of different reasons for a while, and Rafa and Roger had this dual revival that bonded them, brought them back together in 17 and 18, and it was I think one of the happier times in their careers.
I desperately want to ask what the behind the scenes disputes were between Rafa and Roger, but I also don't want you to give away your entire book, because
let's just leave it at that. I mean, I'm not saying they were yelling at each other or going crazy. There was, and the tension was probably more in the teams than with Rafa and Roger to some degree, but there was some for sure. And it's very normal in tennis history. People like Connors and McEnroe, they did not get along, and it's hard to be out there going at each other and taking over somebody's position. And then also Rafa and Roger were very involved in the politics of the game as well at different times, with the prize money and the administration of the sport. And they clashed there at times as well.
Yep. So I'm going to leave that part there. There's the teaser. Everybody, if you didn't have a reason, you already had a reason to buy the book. Now you have a real reason to go buy the book. So
you guys,
if you have a couple minutes, you're at this year's French Open, and just we've already seen, we're taping this on a Wednesday. It's going to air a couple days later. Hopefully there aren't any more big upsets, especially of Americans. But we heard John McEnroe lamenting the lack of men's tennis players from the United States. And right after he does it, Taylor Fritz goes out there and loses in the first round. What is the sense among the tennis community of the American lack of dominance, or even lack of excellence at this point in men's tennis?
I'm sort of torn on this. Jeff, I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel also that it's such a global sport. And I think, is a Federer or a Nadal any more valuable to the American, or any less valuable to the American market than a consistently great American player? Ultimately, people get to know these global stars in this era. I mean, Lionel Messi versus an American soccer player. I mean, what's better for the game in America? I think you could argue that you just go beyond borders and beyond nationality at some degree.
I think sometimes you can get people to cross over to a sport because you slap the flag on it.
Yeah,
that patriotism, nationalism, pride of your own advancing. I think tennis misses out on the casual American with that. I think the people who watch the sport love great tennis, and
Right.
whether, wherever they are in the world, they want to see great people play great tennis. But like the US Open is on fire when there's an American playing on those courts, just like the French Open is on fire when there's a French player. So I think that tennis does miss out on that, in terms of growing the American audience, by not having players they can necessarily latch onto that win. I think there's lots of great personalities that are Americans and lots of great players coming up, but as a culture, we look at results. We like,
Right. I guess my rebuttal to that, Jason, would be that I think tennis had a big advantage in some ways that it didn't fully maximize or fully benefit from, and that is that it was a dual gender sport, a lot of equality in the two genders,
sure.
and they were played together most of these big tournaments at the same places, and they have been for over 100 years. So a lot of other sports have gotten on that bandwagon and seen the beauty of that, and there are other sports that also have that ability as well. Look at stuff like athletics, track and field, for sure. But tennis has had that, and they've produced a lot of stars on both sides. So we can say there's been a drought in American men's tennis for
Yes,
sure, even though
the
Taylor Fritz
women have been
Fritz got to the
great.
final. Exactly, that's what I'm going to say. I mean, so we've had Serena Williams winning 20, 23 majors in recent times, and in the last couple of years, we had Coco Gauff, who's got a lot of charisma, winning the U.S. Open, the U.S. tournament, and Madison Keys, in a great story, just won the Australian Open a few months ago and is still playing pretty well. And she's a very appealing character. So there have been Americans, women, doing great things, and I think they have been able to penetrate in the culture to some degree too. The American men is, it's been a much longer, obviously, drought. Andy Roddick's the last one to win a major. Taylor Fritz, I don't know whether there'll be other finals and majors in his career. He's had some injury problems right now, so he's not at his level. But I feel like there's been plenty of American stars to cover, as the guy has been covering tennis for 30 plus years. More of them in the early years were the men, but they were still great women's players in that period too. So I don't know that we should reduce it to an American men's drought and really be all that concerned. As long as we have American players out there on these big courts and these big tournaments making an impact. But the men are up against it. I mean, you've got guys like Tommy Paul, who's I think a wonderful player to watch. I really enjoy it. Ben Shelton's got a lot of charisma, huge serve. Now, these are top 10 players, I think, for sure on their upside. But are they Grand Slam champions when you already have Carlos Alcaraz and Yannick Sinner established? And you have guys like Alexander Zverev still in their primes that are very, accomplished players who've yet to win a major and are probably better players than those guys overall. And then you have a new wave of guys like Joao Fonseca. I know TNT Sports went big on him yesterday when he won his French Open match. Very talented teenager from Brazil with a huge forehand and a lot of something you can sense is special. And Jakub Menšik, Czech player, won the Miami Open. Teenager beat Djokovic in the final this year. So the Americans men are good. There are a lot of them, but I don't see them. If somebody wins a Grand Slam championship title, it'll be an upset for them. These other guys are young and already established, and you can see the delta there.
As we head into the weekend and then week two, what are the storylines that you think people should look out for?
Well, I mean, one of the interesting ones, if you follow tennis closely, is Iga Swiatek on the women's side in particular. Iga's four-time French Open champion. She's a Rafa disciple, and her game is very well suited to clay and has been a long time number one. But she's been a bit in crisis, anxious mode, I would say, the last 6 to 9 months, and hasn't won a title since she won the French Open here last year. So kind of watching her arc, whether she's able to pull herself together. She's into the third round now, but she's had some tough losses. Hasn't looked like herself, so I'm interested to watch that for sure. I feel like Coco Gauff, loves the clay, has a game that can be well suited to it, but has not seemed to play her best tennis in the biggest matches when she needs to. Very curious about that. Sabalenka, been the number one player in the world this year, deservedly so, has never won the French. So that, and then you have Zheng Qinwen on a global level, Chinese player, huge star in China now, who won the Olympic gold medal in singles at Roland Garros last year and beat Swiatek on the way to doing that. And very curious about that. And the last one I'd mention is Paolini, Jasmine Paolini, kind of a power pack, pocket rocket from Italy, who has just won the Italian Open and has got just this great charisma, was a finalist last year at the French Open in Wimbledon. I think she's got a shot as well. And on the men's side, can Djokovic still be a factor? He won his first round. He's had a tough time lately, split up with Andy Murray with that celebrity coaching arrangement. Novak, you can never count out a player that good, but I think he's a real dark horse. And I'm sort of saying, can Alcaraz and Sinner do what we expect and meet in the final? I think the odds are good of that.
Well, we always appreciate you giving us a little time in between the late night snack for you there with the bread. Chris Clarey, the book is The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay. Go out and get it, find all the backstories, and we look forward to talking to you again next time.
Yeah, great to see you guys. Thanks so much. And I, if you guys were here, I would share my baguette. I want you to know that. It's not all for
now
me.
that's
We are truly touched.
see, there you go.
You got to bring the good cheese, though. Good cheese.
It's still going to leave us hungry, but we appreciate the thought. So.
That's right.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
All the best, guys.